Now, Red Bull are actively looking for the best option when it comes to the second seat, and although it was firmly believed it would be either Perez or someone from the Racing Bulls camp, the Austrian team has now dropped a bombshell on their sister team regarding this matter. This ultimately ruins Ricciardo's purpose of coming back from retirement, and while it's safe to say that Tsunoda could do well in another team, as well as given his strong connections with Honda, this could inevitably mean that Ricciardo would be forced back to retire. So will Red Bull go with an outside hire if they are to replace Perez, and more importantly, will this be the last straw in Ricciardo's F1 career? If there is one thing that is consistently uncertain in F1, it's the second seat in Red Bull from 2018 onwards, when Ricciardo departed the team for Renault. Ever since, the Austrian team changed the majority of drivers, and none of them came even close to matching the pace of the three-time world champion Max Verstappen. However, it seems like that's about to change now that Red Bull have changed their approach when it comes to hiring that important driver in their team. Not to take credit away from Gasly and Albon, both of them have done extremely well in AlphaTauri and Williams respectively, but when it comes to fighting Verstappen, none of them had what it needs to beat the Dutchman. And now with Perez as the second driver, it does seem like the Austrian team has everything they need. The difference is that the grid is becoming more and more compacted. The Austrian squad needs a very strong second driver, much better than Perez. The bad news for Racing Bulls, however, in this entire situation is that it seems like Red Bull are willing to go with an outside hire and not promote from within, even though Tsunoda has been showing remarkable progress and Ricciardo was brought back to the sport for the sole reason of retiring with Red Bull in the foreseeable future. Red Bull is still continuing to evaluate the candidates that would be the perfect replacement for Perez, but the twist here is that it's still unknown as to whether or not they'll opt for changing the Mexican driver, given the fact that he already does what needs to be done to be kept in the team. This in itself is yet another bad news for Tsunoda and Ricciardo, because they now have to hope for a dramatically bad scenario in which Perez or Verstappen won't be part of Red Bull from 2025 onwards, and the candidates that have just surpassed them, in the likes of Carlos Sainz and Fernando Alonso, choose to chase another path in their career. This is hard to believe, given the fact that the conditions Red Bull are offering are unmatchable. Yes, it might look like hell having Verstappen as your teammate, but you'll get to drive the car that's won so many races under the leadership of Verstappen and prove that the second challenger can also be equally as good as the first one of the Dutchman, even though this mission sounds impossible in of itself. Regardless, that's very unlikely to be done by Tsunoda and Ricciardo, who might be forced to look for a drive elsewhere. And as we all know, the close connections of Tsunoda could put him in the seat of Aston Martin from 2026 onwards, because we do know how Honda tends to take care of its drivers and their future in the sport. Even if he doesn't do that, his seat in Racing Bulls will be endangered only if Liam Lawson replaces Ricciardo, which to be fair is not that far-fetched of a scenario either. If the Aussie continues with the bad performances he's done so in the first couple of races in 2024. Although Ricciardo admitted that there is no pressure on his shoulders and he'll pick up the pace in Japan, the home turf of Honda and Tsunoda, with the new floor upgrades of the V-Carb 01, it's evident that he's been questioned quite a lot by Marco, which points towards the fact that Red Bull do not have enough trust to put him next to Verstappen and expect him to be competitive. Elaborating on this matter even further, Marco went on to say, "The question is, has Yuki become a high flyer, or is Daniel so weak? There is no objective answer after 3 races on 3 completely different courses." But the situation could have been worse for Ricciardo's quest, not because of his drop in performance, but because of the fact that Sainz decided to drive on beast mode in 2024 and bid for one of the most competitive seats in 2025, and that's caught the attention of Christian Horner. When talking about the future of that seat, the Brit was not shy to admit that the win of Sainz in Melbourne, which basically came from a driver who's unemployed for 2025, won't go unnoticed, and at a certain times, Red Bull needs to look outside of its pool in order to hire a competitive driver next to Verstappen. Horner personally would vouch more for this scenario to happen because he would be eager to prove to the Dutchman that indeed no man is above the team and they shouldn't act as such. Sainz, while having a questionable reputation as being the better teammate, teammate, has gone on to show otherwise during the 2024 season, and once the car is good, he can deliver top-notch performances in it. Apart from Sainz, we mustn't forget that the two-time world champion Fernando Alonso is also without a seat for 2025 as we speak, and while he would have to have a conversation with Aston before he chooses anything in his career, if the seat in Red Bull becomes viable at any option, the 33rd win in his career would be something he'll chase without any doubt. Furthermore, he would go on to strengthen Horner's opinion that there shouldn't be only one driver who will be prioritised by the team's tactics and internal politics, which was the case with the current ownership disruption between the Thai and Austrian-owned side of Red Bull. And it would be quite a challenge for Verstappen to go head-to-head in the same machinery with a competitive driver, something he hasn't done since 2018 and Ricciardo's demise from the team. So, all in all, the stakes are not looking the best for Tsunoda and Ricciardo as we speak. Now, this video wouldn't contain all the relevant info if we didn't mention Liam Lawson, who had an amazing 5-race debut in 2023 for AlphaTauri and was the highest ranking driver for the team at that time, finishing P9 in Singapore after Russell's last lap crash. But when many wanted to poach him and to bring him as a solid replacement for their current driver weakness, such as Sargent, Horner said that the team has a lot in plan for Lawson from 2025 onwards. But the Kiwi sent his fierce warnings as well, saying that while the ultimate goal remains to race for Red Bull, it would not be the only team for which he would look to drive, as he's keeping his cards wide open now that the entire F1 world knows what kind of talent he possesses. Not only that, but Red Bull are also risking losing another young driver to their rivals, something that could turn back to bite them in their backs, and this begs the question as to whether or not Ricciardo should remain in the sport, given the fact that his motivation, as well as performance, are simply not there as we originally hoped for. But the marketing value that the Aussie has is extremely high, and that helped the newly reformed team of Racing Bulls to attract a lot of talent. But there is only so much you can do with the fading performance of a driver who used to be the superstar of the sport and is now recognisable by his charisma only. Again, for all these drivers to be considered a solid replacement, Perez would have to have a massive drop in performance, and he would have to be knocked out of second place in the Drivers' Championship, which, considering how competitive Ferrari became in 2024, is not that hard to imagine as well. So if we are looking at the current situation in Red Bull, we cannot help but bring up Wolff's statement. As long as Horner leads the team, and that won't change anytime soon, anything is possible when it comes to not only Perez, but Verstappen's future with the team as well. With all this in mind, do you think that it's possible Red Bull will go with an outside hire for Perez's seat and effectively ruin Ricciardo's long-term plan to retire with the Austrian team? And more importantly, which driver do you think has the potential to challenge Verstappen in a fair and square fight in Red Bull? Let us know in the comments down below.